In today's video, I want to talk about a metagame that has been available this month on Showdown. It's called Shared Power, but it's also a random battle. So Shared Power is a metagame in which all of the abilities of your Pokemon are shared on the team, but they're only shared once they get brought out. So that'll become more apparent as I go through some of the replays that I have for you today. But what makes this metagame even more special than the normal Shared Power metagame, which is a metagame that you can play on Showdown normally, is that this is also a random battle, and you actually get to choose your Pokemon before you go into battle. And I think this is one of the things that makes this metagame actually really interesting and fun to play. So normally when you play a normal random battle on Showdown, and Ranbats or random battles is usually the most popular format on Showdown. Of course, there's a lot of OU players, there's a lot of VGC players, but there are a lot of Ranbats players. It's something that's really casual. You can pick it up, put it down, play it on the bus, at work, and line at Walmart or something. But what makes Ranbats really nice is that you don't have to think about your team. However, Ranbats can also really mess you up because if your opponent has something that your team has nothing for, then you can just get 6-0'd straight off the rip. So it's nice to be able to know what your opponent has, and it's nice to be able to then make sure that you actually have something for your opponent. And that's what this Shared Power metagame allows you to do. So they actually give you double the amount of Pokemon you normally would have. You can see here in the team preview that there are actually 12 Pokemon. But you only get to go in with 6. You don't get all 12 Pokemon. And so you need to examine your opponent's team versus your own. And you actually have a mini draft, basically, where you choose, okay, I'm going to go in with these 6 versus my opponent's 6. And then, then after that, it'll be whoever makes the best plays. But because you get to examine your opponent's team, that actually adds an extra layer. But at the end of the day, it's still a random battle. So I didn't have to create an optimal team, nor did my opponent have to. We just loaded it up, and the game chose for us, which makes it really accessible and really easy to pick up and play. So for an example, let's look at my opponent's team, what they have here. So certain things you need to watch out for in these kinds of metagames is, does my opponent have something that is going to come in and annoy me, like Intimidate? Every time an Intimidate Pokemon comes out, it's going to drop my attack stat. So if my opponent has a Pokemon that learned Intimidate, I might want to be able to mitigate that. So on my team, I could have a Paldean Tauros. Paldean Tauros often comes with Intimidate, although I don't believe it's always. I think sometimes you can get angered, cut you on this. But usually it's Intimidate. And the opponent has the Full Metal Body Solgaleo. It would be the best option for my opponent to for sure bring Solgaleo, because you don't want every single one of my Pokemon to be dropping your attack stat with Intimidate. And that's how Shared Power works, is once I bring out my Tauros, every other Pokemon I bring out will also get to Intimidate my opponent. And there are only a few abilities that don't share, and I do think that's something they need to fix, is to specify which abilities do not share. For example, I don't believe Dragon's Maw shares, and that is not made obvious or clear. So that would be the first thing to look for, is, does my opponent have an Intimidate? And if they do, I want to have either Clear Body, Full Metal Body, or even better, Defiant. Defiant or sometimes Contrary, but Defiant is really the best one out of all of those. Clear Body is also quite good, just generally speaking. And Clear Body is also quite good in the second thing you got to watch out for, which is Sticky Web. Now, neither I nor my opponent have Sticky Web, but there's often a Sticky Webber amongst the random Pokemon chosen. And if they have Sticky Web, then you want to be able to mitigate that. Clear Body is one option for that. Another one would be Levitate. And Levitate is not the end-all be-all when it comes to abilities, but it's an extremely powerful ability to have. So if you have it, it's usually a good idea to bring it. Interestingly, in this battle, neither my nor my opponent have it. And then you also want to look out for immunities. So for example, the Vaporeon has Water Absorb. So if my opponent wants to bring that, and then they could bring the Sap Sipper Go-Goat, then the Vaporeon becomes immune to grass moves. Their Talonflame would become immune to water moves. And that can make a Pokemon that might otherwise be weak to something and have a hard time against the Pokemon on my team actually completely immune to it and have a good time. So you'll see what I mean when I get into the battle. So my opponent leads off with Regieleki. I'll lead off with my Tauros. You want to lead off with Tauros because now all the Pokemon get intimidated after that. If I didn't lead off with Tauros, then we wouldn't be intimidating every single guy that came out. Now I do know that my opponent probably has Solgaleo, but getting this started sooner rather than later is good. And really, if you look at my team and their team, close combat switch-ins where they have the Venusaur that gets blown away with Flare Blitz, and they have the Talonflame, and that's it. And I actually have Wild Charge on this set, so that's not even really the best answer. So Tauros is just generally good. Now I'm going to go to Landorus, obviously. Landorus is good for sheer force. That'll boost Flare Blitz, it'll boost some other moves as well. Stealth Rock is a nice and easy safe move. We'll switch into Roaring Moon here because it'll eat a dark move, it'll eat a psychic move. And we get a knockoff, which is really nice. They decide to stay, and they actually don't miss out on the KO, which is really unfortunate for my opponent. Funnily enough, they have Magician from the Hoopa, so that's usually not something you're worried about. Quaquaval is a fantastic Pokemon in this metagame. When you get Moxie, and you've got, from this particular game at least, you've got the full metal body, it's a really scary Pokemon. But funnily enough, because I brought Archaludon, which has the stamina, that means that I'm going to sort of counteract that Moxie. And with the defense boosts that I'm getting, I'm going to just not care about their team at this point. Archaludon is sort of funny because you would care about close combat from Urshifu, but if they've gone for Searching Strikes, which doesn't care about your defense boosts, then you can eat the close combats as a result. At this point, I'm too low of health, and I'm not a dragon type anyway, so I'll die to Searching Strikes, and I got the Moxie boost, which is scary. I have Charizard. Intimidate no longer works, but I would outspeed. I forced the Terra. Unfortunately, we missed the Hurricane, but that's okay. You can see the stamina doesn't matter, obviously, but we are getting it, which is nice. But I also have the Roaring Moon, which does outspeed. So I can get off some more damage from there. And then we'll just speed it up a bit. And then I can clean up with Wild Charge, which they did not know I had. And Wild Charge at this point makes the Quaquaval be in range of anything. I had 2 Cannon last, which maybe could have been a problem, but they only had +1 attack, so it wasn't the end of the world. So this is an example of a battle where there wasn't a lot of really cheesy stuff going on, right? I had Intimidate, which is a really important ability to bring if you can, but my opponent had something to counteract it, which was the Full Metal Body. And then they had the Moxie, but I also had the Stamina, and I had a Pokemon that dealt with their team, so I wasn't getting swept right off the rip. Alright, here we have Sticky Webbers on both sides, so it would be good if you brought something to mitigate that. My opponent does not have Levitate, but they have the Full Metal Body and a Clear Body, so bringing Sticky Web for me isn't really the best idea. I can do it, but since my opponent is almost guaranteed to bring one of those guys, unless I really wanted Technician from the Livani, it wouldn't necessarily be the best option. On my side of the field, do I have anything that deals with the Sticky Web? Yeah, no, I don't. So I have to be able to mitigate that, because my opponent's going to bring the the Kricketune. So I lead with Moltres because it's very obvious that they would do that. I'm just going to Brave Bird, try to get rid of it if I can. My opponent also has an Intimidate Pokemon with Incineroar. I brought the Go-Goat because it has Sap Sipper, so it helps to wall Sinistra. Here we double back because we don't want to let them get the Sticky Web up. And I'm actually able to prevent that because my opponent greedily stays in there, which I don't think they should have done. But the Go-Goat is not here to be a good Pokemon. It's only here for the Sinistra, because I don't want to have to deal with Strain Sap I don't want to have to deal with the Machagacha. And when I have Overquill, which is a dark type, I can have Mandibuzz, which is a dark type. I can deal with the Shadow Ball. So that deals with an entire Pokemon when I have Sap Sipper on these guys. So that's one of the nice things about this team. When you're team building, you can look at your opponent's team and say, I need to deal with a specific threat. And then you can bring a Pokemon like Go-Goat that maybe isn't good. Go-Goat is a bad Pokemon, but it has a good ability that helps another Pokemon on your team. So here you can see how Intimidate is hurting me because I'm forced to switch out my physical attackers every time they bring in any Pokemon. It's not hurting my opponent because they have the clear body for Metagross. But, I mean, I still wanted Overquill, specifically for the Sinistcha, so that's why we have Intimidate. We don't have Intimidate there because Intimidate's good. We have it because I wanted the Dark type. And then the Moltres is here because, as you can see, it completely deals with the Metagross. It deals with the Kricketune. It would deal, in some part, at least with the Solgaleo as well, and the Vileplume. So having that is really good. And you'll also notice that I have Flame Body, but they didn't get a single proc, so that's funny. We're going to save this for sure. I'm going to go into my Dark type. It is getting weakened, but the likelihood of them having Sinistcha now is really low. And I still have the Mandibuzz, because I brought both of them because I wasn't dealing with the stupid Sinistcha. Girder is a fantastic Pokemon because it has Guts, and Guts is really valuable in this. You can get a lot of mileage on having Guts, even on your special attackers. If they have a physical move, like a Flip Turn Golduck or something, if you get a status on them, then all of a sudden, now their Guts boosted. And that's just a fantastic thing to be able to play around with. My opponent here is just going to go for Flame Charge, but they don't realize that Foul Play is a bit of an issue. Of course, they do have the Weakness Policy. That's fine. At this point, I can throw that away because I know I don't need it. And I can just kill them with Volcanion. And then I go into Raikou and two-shot the Oranguru. So Intimidate was a bit annoying in this game. And obviously they didn't bring the Sinistcha, but the Moltres was really good into their team just generally. And I was able to use my Pokemon effectively to deal with their threats. Here we have another way to deal with the Sticky Web, which is Magic Bounce. So my opponent has Magic Bounce, they have Levitate, they have Shadow Shield, which is fantastic. They actually have a couple Levitators. And then they have the Volt Absorb on the Lantern. So looking at my team, how do I deal with that? Well, one thing I do have is Tinkaton's Mold Breaker. Once I have that, then any Pokemon that wants to, Sleep Powder or Stealth Rock can do so. So having Mold Breaker on Tinkaton makes Tinkaton way more valuable than it might otherwise be. So Tinkaton is a pretty good Pokemon in this metagame. It's especially valuable because I do have the Vikavolt, and the Vikavolt has Sticky Web. However, so I could get it up against the Espeon and all of the other Magic Bouncers. However, I still don't think Sticky Web is that valuable, just because they have the Levitate, and Mold Breaker doesn't affect the Levitate. Now, that doesn't mean I won't bring the Vikavolt. It just means that I don't necessarily want to use Sticky Web if I'm going to use the Vikavolt. I could still use it as a Specs attacker. And it also, of course, helps to have Mold Breaker so that I can Volt Switch out against Lantern. So they have Magnezone. He's usually analytic. I feel Magnet Pull would be annoying, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. It only traps Steel types. Now we're going to go Gliscor to get the Toxic Orb activated. The reason to bring Gliscor is just generally Gliscor is good, but if you notice my opponent has Salazzle, and Salazzle is a super annoying Pokemon because it can Toxic everything, and having the Poison Heal means that would actually be detrimental to my opponent. So Gliscor was a must-bring for me on this team. My opponent goes Espeon, which is sort of a funny play there because even if I went for Stealth Rock again, it wouldn't matter because I have the Mold Breaker. But I think sometimes it's really easy to forget in this metagame what your opponent has and what they don't have. This is where Fluffy actually hurts you because you're a physical wall, but you're not really a physical wall when it's a fire type. But we'll just get off a bit of a chip. And that's actually going to hurt us overall in this game. Here I make a bit of a misplay. By a bit of a misplay, I mean there's literally no reason for me to have gone Gliscor here. Because now that I have Fluffy, I'm actually weak to fire moves, so I'm still going to die to that Flare Blitz. But that's okay, because I do have Iron Moth, which I should have gone to originally. I'm going to U-turn here. I don't exactly remember why I did that, but I think just because I didn't want to let Dreadnought set up. And I was pretty sure that they were going to switch there. So now they have the Sap Zipper or Searing Grace, but I believe usually they're Searing Grace. Venomoth is pretty good into that, so I'm going to set up a bit. And here, because I have the Mold Breaker, I'm able to actually go for Sleep Powder against the Cryo. If they had been Sap Zipper, I still could have gone against it as well, because of that Mold Breaker. And that's one of those examples where having Mold Breaker in this metagame is really useful. So we see the Mirror Coat on Magnezone, which is fun, and it does stop the sweep, so good for my opponent for doing that. Yeah, I'm just going to sack the Tinkaton because it's not going to help me out. But at this point, I get a read on my opponent, and I realize, okay, they're just going to Horn Leech. But I can Shell Smash up because I've preserved my Terra. And now that I know basically almost all of their Pokemon, it's pretty safe to just set up. Here, we know they have high horsepower, and high horsepower into Mach Punch would be a problem. Here, I go for a Shell Smash again. I actually figure that my opponent is going to go for a Shell Smash of their own, which is why I did that. It was a bit of a risky play because they could have gone for, Earthquake there, and that would have been a problem. But I just didn't want them to set up on me, so that's why I went for a double Shell Smash. And we walk away with a win there. Here we have an interesting team. My opponent has Rapid Spin support with Bramblegast, but I do have a Sticky Webber, which is why I mention it. They also have a bunch of flying types and guys that don't usually care about that kind of thing. Lurantis, of course, is a major problem with Contrary. So Contrary is another way you can deal with the Sticky Web. However, you do have to be careful with Contrary, because, for example, if this is Swords Dance Terrakion and I put on my Contrary, all of a sudden I can't use my Swords Dance. If I go out into Sylveon and want to call Mind Up, I can't do that either. Rapid Spin will start lowering your speed. So Contrary is a double-edged sword and you have to be really careful with it. But here we have the first appearance of Regenerator. Regenerator is hands down the best ability in this metagame. No questions asked. And I don't care who you are, how many games you played of this, Regenerator is the best. So Ho-Oh, if you see it on your team, you can just mindlessly click that, like literally. Ho-Oh is not only just a fantastic Pokemon, generally speaking, but having Regenerator means that you can play around your opponent, and all of your Pokemon now get 30% health for free, no questions asked. It's an amazing ability, and should be on every team if you can have it. So the timer usually goes down a lot faster in this in the beginning, right in this metagame, because you have to look at your team, look at your opponent's team. So as opposed to Ranbats where you just click a Pokemon and then go from there, this one you actually have to choose. Interestingly, my Lantern walls their Kilowattrel, even though their Kilowattrel also means that even after it's dead, I can't use Volt Switch for the rest of the game. Because in this particular team, I don't have Mold Breaker. So Lantern is sort of walled by the Inteleon because I can't go for an electric move. However, I know I have Regenerator, and because I have Regenerator and my opponent does not, I'm able to play a bit recklessly here. Okay, I got flinched. Oh no. I can just switch out into my other Spadef water type, which I brought. I brought Tentacruel here, not only because it's really good into their fire and water types, but also because I have Volt Absorb of my own, so even the Kilowattrel I don't care about. But because they have the Strength Sap on Bramblegast, so now I'll have Liquid Ooze. Yeah, I brought Araquanid, and this is one of those times where I didn't bring it because of the Sticky Web. I actually brought it because of the Water Bubble. I knew I was going to bring the Lantern, and I was going to bring the Tentacruel, so why wouldn't I want to bring Water Bubble? So I had no intention of going for Sticky Web. I don't even remember if this one had Sticky Web, because they have Contrary, right? I'm not going to Sticky Web against the Contrary team. So when I know I'm bringing two water types, and having that Water Bubble to triple dip on it is actually really valuable. Because look at how much the Scald does. Inteleon, which was a check to me before, is no longer a check. And even if I got flinched here, I could just go into my Tentacruel and regen off all of that damage. So So here, I can go Araquanid and sack it because the Araquanid is not doing anything at this point in time against my opponent's team. And then we can go into the Tentacruel, which walls both of their options, really. We can go for a Water Bubble Surf. Eat this hit, because again, I have Regenerator. And I can just go for whatever I want. They go Lurantis here, and I know exactly what they want to do. It's either Leaf Storm or Superpower, both of which Ho-Oh eat. And we can go for Brave Bird. They haven't gone for Superpower yet, which is fine. They went for Leaf Storm there. I don't know which one was the better play. I think actually Superpower might have been better, just because even though they were boosted already on the Leaf Storm. But I don't know exactly what was going on there. Here we can go Okidogi and sack it. We don't need it anymore. And it looks like my opponent's probably choiced, so they lose there. Okay, here, my opponent has a really annoying team, if they want to make it really annoying. You have Chansey, which gives you Natural Cure. You have Regenerator Alomomola, which is fantastic. You have the Synchronize Umbreon, which is interesting, because that means if I status them, then they can heal it off with the Chansey. And if they don't want to go with Chansey, they could even go with Squawkabilly, which gives you Guts on all of your Pokemon, which is actually not too bad. They have the Intimidate on the Tauros. They've got Lightning Rod on the Rhydon, which could be useful. And they, of course, have the Storm Drain Gastrodon. So they have a lot of really threatening stuff. I mean, imagine pairing Gastrodon with Magcargo. That's pretty annoying. Although I do have the Quaquaval, which can still close combat. On my side of the field, I've got some threats as well. I got the Latias, which is Levitate, which is not that useful in this game, but it isn't too bad either because they do have the Gastrodon, they do have the Rhydon, and it just takes away options from your opponent. So bringing Latias is generally good. I do have Malamar as well. Now, as I said before, if you bring a contrary Pokemon, you're not allowed to set up with the rest of your guys. But that's also only true until you bring out Malamar. So just make sure you don't bring it out until you absolutely have to. Because otherwise it's going to mess up every other guy on your team. You lead off with Great Tusk. That's obviously not a good option. So I'm just going to switch into my Latias. And I get burned there, which is actually sort of a good thing, because that means they are not able to go into Umbreon and Toxic me. I can just keep the burn, which doesn't hurt me. Here they go Florges. And I actually sort of make a weird play here, and I prematurely go for the Terra Steel. But I know the Florges, they have what? Fairy and Grass coverage. So Latias is not scared at all when it's Terra Steel with the Florges. And my opponent thinks that if they Calm Mind up alongside me, that they beat me 1v1. But as they see, the Moonblast is nothing. Latias is very specially defensive. And so I can continue to Calm Mind up, as my opponent allows me to set up. And for some of you who are a little more skilled at Pokemon, realize this is a major misplay. I do have Psyshock. And Psyshock is the bane of all Calm Mind wars when it comes to Ranbats. Right? A lot of times, people will try to Calm Mind up alongside you. Never Calm Mind up against the Psychic type, because 9 times out of 10, they have Psyshock or Stored Power, both of which are going to beat you in the long term. Here they have to go for the crit Stone Edge, because I have Levitate. It's the only thing they have going for them. And here I'm able to go for Psyshock. Could have gone for Draco Meteor technically, but Psyshock was fine. I could have even Moonblast, or I could have healed up, recovered if I wanted to. They're going for Draco Meteor because it's going to be stronger against Scizor, and I just have to make sure that Scizor dies, because it could have close combat, and that would be annoying. Here I want to get rid of the Rhydon. I saw the crit before, and at this point they've already lost a lot of their Pokemon, so I just want to make sure I get a safe kill. A Gastrodon could have Clear Smog, but I'm a Steel type, so I no longer care about that. So we'll skip ahead a bit here, and we see the last one is Ice Q. We'll just drop a Draco on that, and then we'll call it good. So this is sort of a 6-0 nasty sweep that my opponent should not have stayed in with their Florges. At that point, you forced my Terra. You probably should have gone into something else. Maybe your Scizor would have been good if you had close combat. I think that's what they should have done. I didn't have to go into anything else past that point. Alright, here we see the really a bad Pokemon to run into, that being the Shadow Tag Gothitelle. They allowed Shadow Tag Gothitelle into this metagame, even though Gothitelle is level 90, which is insane. I mean, Gothitelle itself is not that good of a Pokemon, but having Shadow Tag is actually one of the few ways that you can stop Regenerator. So Shadow Tag, I would say, is a must bring 9 times out of 10. Because if my opponent has Regenerator, it's a must bring. It also blocks your opponent from doing anything anytime you bring out a Pokemon. Imagine having 6 Shadow Tag Pokemon, and you just always trap your opponent's Pokemon. That's broken. So bringing a Pokemon that can pivot is really useful in these kinds of metagames, or in this kind of game. So as you can see, my opponent lead off with the Gothitelle. Why not? I'm just gonna go for knockoff. I'm trapped. This maybe, this is not the best lead for me, but I literally have no other option. And thankfully, Poliwrath with an Assault Vest is a beast, and it can actually take out the Gothitelle, which is fine by me. We got Klefki, which is an interesting play. Now I am trapped in here still, so cool. Like, I'm trapped with you. You can do whatever you want, but I do get to weaken you a bit. And now I'm gonna go Kilowattrel because I don't want anything else on my team to get Thunderwaved. And that's a really annoying Pokemon. And you could have had on that, you could have had on Volbeat. This is a funny switch in. They do have Prankster Toxic because Klefki is Prankster. And I will say that Prankster Quagsire is a fantastic combo if you can pull it in this metagame. I think I've got it at least in one battle before. You get Prankster Recovers, you get Prankster Toxic. It's really valuable. Fortress gives you Sturdy, making it also a good pick, just generally speaking. But I wouldn't rely on it too hard. Here we're just going to turn out because I don't want to give them Anger Shell. Anger Shell Cloth is a scary Pokemon to have to deal with. So we're going to get up the Grassy Terrain. I could have gone for Grassy Glide, and I was predicting them to maybe want to go for Terra there, but they did not go for that. However, because they didn't go for it there, we're just going to go with the Hydro Pump. I did forget at this point that they had Sturdy, so that's my fault. And so we let Cloth run away with this a little bit. But that's okay, because you're about to see something crazy that you'll never see normally. And that is this Titan Sweep. So we get the Ice Shard off. Now we've already shown that Sturdy is a problem, but I can Terra Water Liquidate and resist the Fortress's hit. And again, I'm trapped in with this Fortress because they have the Shadow Tag. But I guess they don't have anything better to hit me with than an Iron Head. So I'm able to 3-shot the Fortress. This is Sheer Force boosted, Life Orb. And here I make, I don't know if it's a prediction, but I just Icicle Crash as they show Smash Up, which I don't think they should have ever done. I think they should have just killed me. Because then they lose, right? I don't know what the heck that was. I guess the problem is if they kill me, then I get to go Kilowattrel, and I have a Pokemon in the back. But the Titan was able to clean up there, which is pretty fun. But now let's talk about a game that is not so fun. So this is where this metagame, which is really fun and really creative, and you get to choose your Pokemon at the beginning and counter team your opponent. And there's 2 phases of play where your skill can come into play. The first one being where you choose, right? It takes skill to choose. And then you get to actually play out the game. But then sometimes this game just breaks down. And I want to show you how. So as we've seen, there are certain abilities that are just broken. And when you get them in combination with other abilities, they can become even more broken. And I've had my opponent have Unaware, Regenerator, and there's not much you can do against that. And so when it's my turn to get the Unaware plus Regenerator, you can see Skeletor's is Unaware, Ho has Regenerator, you know I'm going to abuse that. So my opponent has Pheasantipity, which is a pretty decent choice because it does have the Toxic Chain. Not all of my Pokemon can get poisoned. But when I have Regenerator, I don't care about that. Now, when I saw the Suicune, that was when I specifically knew I needed the Unaware Skeledirge. Because once I bring this out, yeah, I brought the Skeledirge out on a Water type. That's crazy. Why would I do that? Well, because now I've completely invalidated Suicune as a Pokemon. Suicune is only a good Pokemon against non-Unaware Pokemon. once I have Unaware, I don't care anymore. I will say the Suicune still is good for my opponent because it has pressure. And so I have the Ho-Oh, I have the Arceus. These are Pokemon that value their PP. And not being able to spam Judgment, spam Sacred Fire is actually pretty valuable. But as we'll see, that only sort of matters. So as you can see here, I lose 2 power points from the Sacred Fire. That is annoying. But I can go to Toadscruel now, which I brought actually for another cheeky reason. You see I get Toxic. That's annoying, but I have Regenerator, so it doesn't matter. My Psyllium Might is one of the few times where it's actually going to be valuable. I can go for the Spores against my opponent, even though all of my Pokemon have the Magic Bounce. I have my Psyllium Might. My Psyllium Might is actually pretty funny here, because now my Psyllium Might Calm Minds are going to go last, and my Recovers are going to go last. So it actually sort of hurts my Arceus here a bit, as you'll see. But because this Como will get to outspeed me. Here I go for the Terra Ghost because I don't want the Como to be able to hit me, and I want to be able to Calm Mind up on it. Funnily enough, here they get the Toxic Chain Scale Shot, which I wasn't thinking about admittedly. And I go for the Calm Mind here. Now I'm thinking, okay, well that's not that big of a deal, because I could recover up on it, but they would outspeed me, so I'm forced to attack them there. And they would have outsped me anyway, even if I didn't have the Mycelium Might. But I sort of wasted my Terra there a little bit, but at least I'd get rid of the Como, which is good. Protean? I want to say that it might be bugged, because I swear, when I use Protean in this metagame, every time I change a move, it changes the type that I'm at. And the same for my opponent. So I don't know what that's all about. So I'm pretty specially defensive. There, obviously I did not change types, so I don't know, it only happens sometimes. But that's why I brought it. I wanted to be able to Toxic things, since my opponent doesn't have the Regenerator. And here we can just kill the Hatterene with Shadow Ball because my opponent has no Shadow Ball switch-ins. And they bring out the Dragapult, which is sort of annoying. I can actually sack the Skeledirge here at this point. It doesn't really do anything. And now I can go into Ho-Oh. I'm going to throw off Brave Bird or whatever. It doesn't matter. I'm actually going to get rid of my Fire typing here, which is pretty valuable in this particular situation. My opponent does have Rest, which is somewhat annoying. But we can just start spamming any move that I want because the Suicune is not a threat to me. And as you'll see, I'm going to start just messing around with the Suicune a bit to try to waste some of its power points. They have the pressure, which is really bad for me, and so I want to be able to get rid of my opponent's power points as much as they're getting rid of mine. Here I'm just going to tank the Shadow Ball and try to get rid of the Dragapult, because the Dragapult is the fastest thing, and I need to be able to kill it. I think they should have switched out there every time, because my Toadscruel, as you can see, very especially tanky, and because I have Regenerator, I'm able to play like this. If I did not have Regenerator, all of my Pokemon would be at 10%, 20%, and they'd all be Toxic, and so I'd be losing this battle 100% of the time. Of course, I'm playing this way because I have Regenerator. But because I have Regenerator, I'm able to play this way, where my opponent just really can't get anything going. So they go for the Iron Head. They get the Poison again. But once again, I do not care about that because I have Regen. Okay, so they go for Serendipity. They try to double, which I have U-turn, so that doesn't really work out for them the way they're thinking it will. And I can go back into Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh's going to dodge a Gunk Shot, which may have mattered, but probably not. And I can just become a Ground type. At that point, now that I'm a Ground type, I can resist the Gunk Shot, so I can stay in. And my Ho-Oh is getting really low. And the Suicune thinks, oh, I can come out now. So my Misdreavus comes out, got Eviolite, pretty tanky, especially defensive. So I can go into that. Then I can go into Toadscruel. And as you can see, the The way you know you've won in this game is when your Pokemon come out, they get lit up when they're alive, and they're grayed out when they are fainted, and then they're the in between when they haven't been revealed yet. And since my Pokemon, there are 5 grayed out Pokemon and 1 lit up Pokemon, I know this is my opponent's last Mon. And because I have this Misdreavus and the Toedscruel, I can switch between them indefinitely because of Regenerator. Both of these guys have Regenerator. Now, to my opponent, it might look like I'm being sort of mean and just BMing because I have, I'm not attacking them. But my Toedscruel actually has Leaf Storm, it does not have Giga Drain, and my opponent, of course, has Calm Mind. So Leaf Storm into them is going to lose all the power points, and so I shouldn't attack them. So I'm able to just switch between my 2 Regenerator Pokemon, and because I have Unaware, my opponent isn't actually able to touch me. And I don't think they're quite thinking about that yet. As we'll see here, on this turn they Scald, and it's at that turn, I think, where they sort of realize, wait a second, why didn't that do any damage? And then they're going to realize, wait a second, I literally can't win this battle. And it's at that point they're going to sort of rage quit. But I don't want to play this way necessarily, but that is the optimal way to play this metagame. If you get Intimidate, you should usually bring it unless your opponent has Defiant. If you get Regenerator, you 100% of the time bring it. If you have Unaware, you should always bring that as well, because it just enables a more loose kind of playstyle, a lot more safe playstyle, where you're able to react to what your opponent does more. Your opponent's not able to get passive chip with Toxic. Your opponent's not able to go for contrary sweeps. If your opponent has Toxic Chain, that doesn't matter anymore. Toxic on my Pokemon, I don't care, because I have Regenerator. So I do think this metagame is really fun, but there are a few abilities I think that need to be nerfed or removed entirely, because I do think Regenerator is actually detrimental to this metagame. And the Regenerator Unaware combo, in particular, is really nasty, because your opponent just cannot touch you. And if you have bulky Pokemon like that, like, what are you supposed to do against that? Unaware can be bypassed if you have Mold Breaker. The Mold Breaker is only like on 3 guys. You have it on Tinkaton, you have it on Haxorus, which is good. And I mean, in theory, if you had it on Ogerpon and you happen to get it, but I haven't seen that as often. I do see Haxorus and I do see the Tinkaton, and so those are good. But Mold Breaker, I think, is detrimental to this metagame. Or not Mold Breaker, sorry. Regenerator. Specifically, Regenerator is detrimental to this metagame, and I do think it should be removed. But other than that, I do think this metagame is really fun, because you get to team build, and you get to play at the same time. But that's all I have for today's video, and I'll catch you guys next time.